Ever feel like you're kind of caught between, your best self and, let's just say, not so great impulses, like that angel on one shoulder, devil on the other thing?
Yeah.
Today we're diving into the Bhagavad-gītā, chapter 16, where it gets real about this inner battle between, it calls it divine and demoniac natures.
Right.
And just so you know, we're not talking literal gods and demons here.
Right.
More like qualities we all have to some degree.
It's really fascinating how the Gita uses these archetypes as a framework for understanding the paths we can take.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing these qualities within us and choosing which ones to cultivate.
Okay, let's unpack that. So divine qualities, the Gita lists 26.
Right.
Fearlessness, purity, self-control. It's like a whole laundry list of ideal traits. But how do those actually play out in real life?
Well, take fearlessness, for example. It's not just like physical bravery, right?
Right.
It's also about having the courage to question, seek truth, even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Or think about purity. It's about purifying our intentions, our actions, approaching life with integrity.
It's like we all have those moments where we could give in to, the easy way out.
Right.
But the Gita is saying, hold on, you're capable of so much more.
Exactly. And it's important to remember the context here, too. These qualities are presented within this framework of the Indian Varshama Dharma system.
Okay.
Which, to put it simply, is about everyone having a unique role to play in society based on their nature and skills.
So kind of like in a well-functioning society, we need people with different strengths, different talents, working together.
Precisely. And the Gita emphasizes that this system, it isn't meant to be rigid or solely based on birth.
Okay.
It's about education, qualification, and ultimately finding that harmony within ourselves and within society as a whole. Everyone has something valuable to contribute.
Makes me think of that example from the commentary with Lord Caitanya, who was incredibly devoted to his sannyasa vows, especially those regarding women. Talk about self-control.
A perfect example of how these divine qualities manifest in action. It reminds us that adhering to our dharma, our own purpose, requires discipline, commitment.
Okay, so we've got a good grasp on, the divine side, but what about that shadow side? Those demoniac qualities, we all have those too, right?
Absolutely. The Gita highlights 6 primary ones. Think, pride, arrogance, conceit, those ego-driven traits that inflate our sense of self. And then anger, harshness, ignorance, often stemming from that inflated ego, which can lead to a pretty bleak outlook.
So basically buying into the idea that the world revolves around us and our desires.
Exactly. The demoniac worldview centers around this belief that the world is unreal, without a higher purpose or governing force. It's all about fulfilling those immediate desires, driven by lust, with little regard for consequences.
And those consequences, as the Gita makes clear, can be pretty intense. We're talking about the law of karma here, right?
Exactly. The Gita suggests that engaging in these demoniac actions creates negative karma, which can lead to a cycle of suffering, even repeated births in lower, less evolved forms of life. It's like this universal principle of cause and effect. What we sow is what we reap.
So you're saying if we're constantly giving in to those, let's say, less than ideal impulses,
Right.
we're basically setting ourselves up for a bumpy ride.
Think of it like this. Imagine planting seeds of anger, greed, and ignorance. What kind of harvest do you think you'll reap?
Yeah, not exactly a recipe for a peaceful, fulfilling life. But the good news is the Gita doesn't just leave us hanging with doom and gloom.
Right.
It offers a way out, a path towards breaking free from this cycle of suffering.
Absolutely. And that path involves recognizing the importance of Scripture, of having a moral compass to guide our choices and actions.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What role does Scripture, or as the Gita calls it, Shastra, play in all of this?
Think of Scripture as a guiding light, a source of wisdom passed down through generations. It gives us a framework for making choices that lead to greater freedom, greater fulfillment.
So it's not about blindly following rules,
Right.
but understanding the deeper wisdom behind them.
Precisely. It's about aligning ourselves with a higher purpose, recognizing our actions have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for the world around us. And the Gita emphasizes that following scriptural injunctions can purify our existence, gradually chipping away at those demoniac qualities and making space for something far greater.
Okay, I love that. It's like we all have this potential for both darkness and light within us.
Yes.
And the Gita is saying, hey, you have a choice here. You can feed the demon within or nourish your divine nature.
Exactly. And that choice, that internal struggle, is something we all face every day.
Yeah.
But the more we understand these opposing forces within us, the more empowered we become to make choices that lead to true freedom, true fulfillment.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground, explored divine and demoniac natures, delved into karma, and even touched upon the importance of scripture in these inner battles.
And throughout this exploration, it's crucial to remember these aren't just abstract concepts. They're meant to be reflected upon, internalized, and ultimately applied to our lives. So as we continue this deep dive into the Bhagavad-gītā, I encourage you to consider, which qualities are you embodying? Are there any demoniac tendencies you'd like to transform?
Yeah.
What are some ways you can cultivate more of those divine qualities within yourself?
I think that's such a powerful question to ask ourselves, because it's so easy to go through life on autopilot, just reacting to things instead of responding from that place of greater awareness, like the Gita's talking about.
It's true. And, the more we can bring those divine qualities into our daily lives, even in small ways,
Yeah.
the more we start to shift that balance within ourselves.
It's like creating a ripple effect, right? Like
Yeah.
imagine everyone put a little more effort into cultivating compassion, generosity, patience. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Absolutely. But the Gita also acknowledges that it's not always easy. In fact, it specifically calls out these three major obstacles, these gates to hell, as it calls them, that can really trip us up on our journey.
Gates to hell sounds intense. Tell me more about these.
Well, they're not literal gates, of course,
Right.
but rather very human weaknesses we all grapple with. Lust, anger, and greed.
Oh, yeah. Those are definitely some familiar foes. I think we've all encountered those at some point.
Exactly. And they're so powerful because they prey on our desires, promising happiness, fulfillment, but often leading us down a path of suffering.
It's like that saying, be careful what you wish for. Sometimes those desires can lead us down some pretty dark alleys if we're not careful.
Exactly. Think about it. When we're driven by lust, whether it's for possessions, power, or even just like fleeting pleasures,
Yeah.
we can get so fixated on getting what we want that we forget what truly matters.
And it can become like an addiction, right? Always chasing that next hit of pleasure, that satisfaction, but never really feeling content.
Precisely. And then there's anger. When anger controls our actions, we often end up hurting ourselves and those around us. It's a cycle of negativity that can be tough to break free from.
It's like that whole holding on to hot coals analogy, right?
Yes.
You're the one who gets burned.
Exactly. And then we have greed, that insatiable desire for more, more, more. It's like this bottomless pit never filled.
It's funny, you'd think having more of what we want would make us happy, but it's often the opposite. We end up just wanting even more.
It's a never-ending cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. And the Gita reminds us that true fulfillment, lasting happiness, doesn't come from chasing those external things.
So if these gates to hell are like traps, how do we avoid them? What's the way out?
Well, remember how we were talking about scripture as a guiding light?
Right.
This is where it becomes crucial.
Okay, so it's more than just reading the scriptures, right? It's about actually putting those teachings into practice.
Exactly. It's about using those teachings as a roadmap for life's challenges,
Yeah.
for making choices that align with our highest selves.
So how do we actually do that? How do we take these ancient teachings and make them relevant to our modern lives, especially when we're faced with these very real temptations, lust, anger, greed?
That's such an important question, and I think it's different for everyone. But one thing the Gita emphasizes is self-reflection. Taking the time to really look inward and examine our own thoughts, our motivations, our actions.
It's like we're hitting the pause button on autopilot, right? And actually asking ourselves, why am I doing this? Where's this coming from? And is it really serving me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about bringing that awareness to those moments when we're tempted to act out of those, those baser instincts.
Yeah.
Because once we start to understand the patterns,
Right.
we can start to make different choices.
It's like that saying, know thyself, but on a whole other level.
Right. And remember, it's a process, right? None of us are perfect.
Yeah.
We're all going to stumble from time to time.
Totally.
The key is to keep learning, keep growing, keep striving towards that ideal of embodying more of those divine qualities in our everyday lives.
And maybe that's the real message of the Gita, right? It's not about achieving this perfect state of being, but embracing the journey of self-discovery and just striving to be a little bit better each day.
Beautifully said. And I think that's a message that's just as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up, there's one more point from the Gita I wanted to touch on.
Okay.
It's this idea that even those who are really steeped in those demoniac qualities have a chance for redemption. It specifically mentions that if they're killed by the Supreme Lord, they can actually achieve liberation.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? I have to admit that one's a little hard to wrap my head around.
It's definitely a challenging concept, especially when we're viewing it through a modern lens, right?
Right.
But within the context of the Gita's philosophy, it speaks to this boundless compassion and mercy of the divine.
Okay.
It suggests that even those who've really strayed far from the path can find their way back,
Okay.
sometimes through unexpected or even seemingly harsh circumstances.
So it's not about punishment, but rather a kind of divine intervention, like
Yeah.
a course correction from a higher power.
That's one way to interpret it.
Okay.
It speaks to this idea that ultimately we're all souls on this journey of evolution, and that even in our darkest moments, there's always hope for transformation and liberation.
Wow, that's a powerful thought to end on.
Yeah.
I think we've all had those moments where we felt lost or stuck in those, less than ideal aspects of ourselves. And the Gita reminds us that there's always a way back to that light within.
Absolutely.
It just takes courage and self-awareness and a willingness to do the work.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, it looks like we've reached the end of our deep dive into the Bhagavad-gītā's 16th chapter.
Yes.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling both challenged and inspired to kind of look at my own inner landscape and see how I can cultivate a little more of that divine nature in my own life.
Me too.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into that wisdom that's all around us.